I loved being a dad. I loved my wife. It was a beautiful marriage, but it was also just like monotonous. I remember seeing an advertisement, life is short, have an affair. I was like, that sounds intriguing.
Ashley Madison was ahead of his time.
The vision was to be the largest and only website for married people who wanted to have an affair. When I would go to trade shows, it would say, who's your biggest competitor? And I'd say the Bible.
I thought it was a great idea. Go on a site and you're able to tell this stranger your deepest, darkest desires.
I signed up with all my real information, which obviously was a stupid decision.
At that time, cybersecurity was just starting to enter the public consciousness.
Security came up quite frequently. We talked about it, we were worried about it.
Ashley Madison was a cash cow. And then all of a sudden, we got hacked. It was chaos.
This hack is one of the largest data breaches in the world.
If that information got out, this would ruin a lot of people's lives.
Everyone was looking for dirt, looking for names that they recognized.
And then name after name started coming out.
You had celebrities being disgraced.
It was an absolute witch hunt.
I had no idea what was coming.
It was all over the media, like, what is going on? Just such a selfish decision. I felt so humiliated.
I wanted to get into bed, pull the sheets over my head, and put on the Golden Girls.
This could be the biggest hack of all time.
Everyone was wondering who was behind it.
The theories were all over the place. Maybe it was a competitor.
Cheating a husband.
A disgruntled employee. It's a giant whodunit. This went way, way too far.
We all have a list that we're on that is our secret.
Accusing people, trying to publicly shame them.
Started to realize a lot more is going to come out.
That was a trailer for the Netflix docu-series Ashley Madison, Sex, Lies, and Scandal. And this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. When Ashley Madison, a so-called dating site for people seeking adulterous affairs, was hacked in 2015, millions of users saw their most intimate personal details exposed to the public eye. Marriages were wrecked and lives destroyed. Award-winning director Toby Paton joins us to discuss his new film, which explores the creation of the Ashley Madison website during the dot-com boom, and what is arguably one of the biggest and most damaging cybersecurity breaches in history. Stay tuned. Toby Paton, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. To remind our listeners and viewers, we're talking about Ashley Madison, Sex, Lies, and Scandal, releasing on May 15th on Netflix. So great to have you on, and congratulations for getting this project in the can and released. You must be quite excited about that.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Yeah, it's been a kind of like long old journey, like the best part of a year's work, really, from beginning to end. So yeah, it's exciting to see it. Excited to see it launch and to see how it goes down and how people respond to it.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, so since most our viewers will release, obviously we have to embargo this until about the release date, but since most, I have good chance at least some of our early listeners and viewers will have not seen it. Maybe you can tell us, what is Ashley Madison, Sex, Lies, and Scandal all about? Maybe give us a brief synopsis.
So it's telling the story of the infidelity dating website Ashley Madison, which was set up in the early 2000s with the kind of like express MO of being a dating site for people who want to cheat on their partners. And they offered a discreet dating service in which they promised that your data would be kind of completely protected. No one would ever discover you've been on it. And you could come on their dating service and find other people who are also in relationships, but who, for whatever reason, are looking for another relationship outside of the one that they're in. Okay. The website was obviously launched to a lot of kind of moral outrage and uproar, a lot of controversy, but became extremely popular. They built up a user base of about 37 million users. So the company was doing really well. But in 2015, they got hacked. And basically all the names of all the users ended up being published on the internet. So the series really kind of tells the story of the rise of the company. We kind of speak to some of the guys who set it up, talk about, why they set the company up, what it was supposed to be about, what it was like to work there, how they built it in the way that they did, kind of like, tell the success story, the rise of the company, and then we tell the story of the hack and the fallout from the point of view of the company. But also we're telling the story from the point of view of the users and the people who are on the site. So during the first film, when we're kind of meeting the guys who set up the company, we're also meeting the people who are on the site. We're finding out why they're on there, what they were looking for, what experiences they were having, and we're finding out about their marriages and their relationships, and what was going on with them at home that was leading them to be on Ashley Madison.
Yes, it's so much more than just a doc about a website. That's for sure. I mean, just to say to our listeners, viewers, I mean, not that there's huge spoiler alerts. You've pretty much summed it up in terms of what's happened, but do watch it because we will discuss some things that are kind of revelations that come up in, let's say, episode 3. It's a three-part series, but you're talking about it. And the thing that struck me, and I've kind of confirmed this, even been asking people and talking to people in the last few days, saying, "Oh, I'm going to do this recording, and I'm going to be talking about the Ashley Madison site." And people are like, it's kind of oddly had already forgotten about this piece of history. I mean, people then remember it once you bring it up, but it's less than 10 years later, and everyone's kind of vague about it. Why do you think that is? Because it was such a huge deal when it happened. When that hack was huge.
It was a huge story, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. I mean, I guess it's the kind of thing that kind of maybe didn't stay in the news much after it happened. Obviously, one of the extraordinary things about the story is that Ashley Madison is actually still going.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, which I always find absolutely extraordinary. And often when I tell people about the series, one of the things that kind of shocks them the most is when you kind of go on to say, and actually the company's still going.
Yeah.
But they fairly kind of like heavily changed their MO. The whole way they operated changed. They're a much more kind of low key company. I think it's fair to say now they don't kind of engage in that kind of outlandish, audacious marketing. They're not out there trying to grab news headlines in the way that they were. So they're not. I don't think the company's in the public eye in the way that it used to be. And of course, a lot of the people who were exposed in the hack never wanted to be exposed in the hack. They never wanted to be public. It wasn't anything anyone really wanted to talk about ever again. So right. I guess that's kind of it. Kind of what's added to that sense of the story kind of disappearing and dying down.
But indeed, it is very. I mean, as I say, the story actually spans a few decades now, so it is very much. Those early days are certainly very much of an era, aren't they? I mean, this .com boom and anything goes and brazen.
That's
not
right.
That sex sells, but brazen selling of sex. I mean, it's quite outlandish for the time. Probably would still be, I guess.
I think absolutely. I think one of the things that's really fascinating about Ashley Madison is when you first hear about the concept of the website, an infidelity dating website for people who want to cheat on their partners, you think, oh, well, that's probably kind of grown out of Tinder. It's kind of like, we've had kind of like Match.com, we've had Guardian Soulmates, we've had, those kind of like more formal dating sites, we've had Tinder, and then now you end up at Ashley Madison. But actually, Ashley Madison was launched kind of 12 years prior to Tinder.
Right.
It was launched, we're talking about early 2000s, really kind of .com boom, a really early kind of internet company at a time when internet dating itself, there was still a lot of stigma around it. People weren't always out there. It wasn't kind of a common thing to be on the internet dating, looking for a partner. Most people just didn't do it.
Right.
So I think when you think about that, it seems even more kind of audacious that Noel and the people who came up with the company did come up with it in at that time.
I mean, you just mentioned Noel Bitterman, the former CEO. I mean, this sounds like a crazy place to work. I mean, it has all the trappings of like a corporate entity, but at the same time, it also, and you have access to a lot of the big names and people that were in it. I mean, maybe tell us a little bit about what that was like. I mean, it just absolutely sounds crazy.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think it was a kind of like crazy place to work. And I mean, one of the things really interesting talking to the people who work there is all the people that we spoke to anyway, and we spoke to quite a few people who would work there, some of them really quite senior in the company, they all seem to have really enjoyed their time there. It feels like there was a good atmosphere in the office, kind of like a good sense of camaraderie, and just a sense that they were having fun. The guys who invented the adverts, the guys who were coming up with these kind of like crazy harebrained PR schemes, you can tell talking to them now, the kind of sparkle in their eyes and the relish with which they tell these stories, they were all really enjoying themselves.
Yeah, and you even got the young MBA who comes in and who's like, well, I know this is not the traditional job to get out of business school, but then worried about what's going to happen and stuff. But Noel especially, I mean, he's like, so he's the one that comes in, he comes up with the new tagline, life is short, have an affair thing. And then he's just all over the business. I mean, everywhere you went, CNBC, Fox Business, all these places, he's there. He's like, he enlists his wife. I mean, he's telling everyone that adultery is good for marriage, and it's he's doing a service. I mean, it's quite. I guess that kind of stuff sells as well. So that probably explains why he was on so much. But he was just omnipresent there for a while.
Yeah, he's a really kind of extraordinary character, Noel. And it's kind of important to note that he didn't actually come up with the idea for the website. The idea was kind of first originated from a guy called Darren Morgenstern. Yeah. Who then I think has kind of like been described to me as the kind of guy who kind of an ideas guy who had the idea for the company, but didn't really have the kind of the desire to try and take it on and build it. But it was Noel who really saw the potential in this idea, and who, through kind of becoming the face of the company, was able to really kind of like grow it and cause it to explode in the way that it did. And it's fascinating when you think about, the kind of the audacity with which Noel did sell that company. I mean, his whole argument, as you alluded to a minute ago, was that infidelity is a marriage preserver. Not only can you come on this site, have an affair with someone and never get discovered, but in doing so, you're going to be saving your marriage. That was his shtick. And he would go on, kind of cable TV, network TV, big major kind of like TV shows across the US and across the world, making that argument.
Yeah. I mean, I think you say on there, you tried to interview Noel, and I can understand why he maybe said no to being interviewed, given all the revelations have come out. But what about Darren? Because he's this kind of mysterious, low-profile figure. He's still around, right? He's the founder, but did you ever, because his brother's on, right? His brother's in
the series. That's right. Yeah. His brother was a creative director for a while in the kind of early days, and was responsible for a lot of the early marketing of the company. So he's in the series. Darren, I think, didn't want to do it. I'm pretty sure we did reach out to Darren, and for whatever reason, my assumption would be that he feels he's moved on. For him, Ashley Madison was probably a long time ago now.
Right.
And maybe he doesn't hold the same kind of place in his heart that it does for someone like people like Mark Morgenstern and Evan Back.
Right.
You can tell the company really holds a special place in their heart.
Yeah. No, Evan's quite a character you've got, and the glimmer in his eyes is just in every scene where you're interviewing him is very evident.
He's a wonderful storyteller, Evan. Yeah, he's a real gift.
Yeah, exactly. We've had a few of these themes in our recordings lately about these gifts to documentarians, and he definitely was. You must have, when you walked in to start interviewing him, you must have felt like you'd struck gold. Yeah,
I mean, I could tell actually from the first time I spoke to him on Zoom. Yeah. I remember me and my producer, Chris McLaughlin, speaking to him on Zoom, and as soon as the call finished, I just turned to Chris and said, "Oh my God, he's great." Yeah.
So all is going well, extremely well. They're, up to 37 million users or subscribers, and then July 2015 happens, and there's something called the Impact Team orchestrates this, what arguably, I guess you could say, is one of the biggest hacks or most damaging, certainly right up there with anything we've experienced in history. And yet, we still don't know who did it, do we?
We don't. No, we don't. That's one of the most extraordinary things about this whole story is that no one to this day, no one has any idea who perpetrated this hack. And all the cybersecurity experts that we speak to tell us how it's almost unique to have such a sophisticated, high-profile hack take place, and for the kind of MO that's used not to have been seen in any hacks prior to that or in any hack subsequent. But normally, a major hack like that, sophisticated hack, you would see trace of a similar MO elsewhere, and you'd be able to kind of trace the hacker's work, even if you couldn't identify them. But in this case, not only does no one have any idea who hacked Ashley Madison, the cybersecurity experts are pretty certain that those guys have not hacked anyone else because they can't see any of those same fingerprints in terms of the MO anywhere else.
That's extraordinary. So, you've been on this project for a while. Do you have any, do you have any theories of your own about who you think did this, or?
It's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of theories out there. Some of them more kind of outlandish than others. I think for me personally, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it was someone who was connected to the company, someone with some kind of inside knowledge, either someone who was employed by the company or maybe a contractor who had some kind of inside knowledge of it. Because it seems like the hackers seem to have such kind of intimate knowledge of personalities within the company, their different roles, things that they might have said, how the company was structured and how it worked on the inside. So that does lead you to believe that it was someone who knew the company from the inside.
Well, and certainly a lot of people had a reason to orchestrate this hack, but we'll talk about that actually after the break. We're going to give our listeners and viewers a quick early break. So we'll be right back with Toby Paton, the award-winning director of Ashley Madison, Sex, Lies, and Scandal, releasing on May 15th on Netflix. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or X to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Toby Paton, the director of Ashley Madison, Sex, Lies, and Scandal. It's releasing on May 15th on Netflix. So we were just talking about the big hack that happened in July 2015 and how extraordinarily we don't know who did it and there's no evidence, and these people seem to have only been one time, kind of like a one-time adulterer, right? It doesn't usually just happen once, but this seems to be the case. But that's the thing. There was, as I think your series points out, there were a lot of different people who would have had reason to want to bring Ashley Madison down. And maybe that gets to this dark side of Ashley Madison. I mean, it's, I think some don't blame the site, others do. It was certainly preying on maybe broken hearts and people who are, how did you approach this, and what are your conclusions going into this now that you've been exploring the world of infidelity and what drives mostly men, but we'll talk more about that in a minute, to do something like that and get on a website and try to cheat on their spouse?
It's a good question. It's a fascinating thing, infidelity, isn't it? Because it arouses some really strong emotions in us, right?
Right.
People get really kind of upset, really angry by the idea of cheating. It's something that I think we all kind of imagine happening to us, and it's one of the worst things that we could imagine happening to us. That kind of being betrayed in that way by a partner who we love and trust is obviously, it's an awful thing to imagine happening, and we all know how kind of damaging and destructive it can be. But I think what's interesting about infidelity is that because of that, people don't often think about why people are doing it. People don't often spend much time thinking from the kind of the perspective of the person who's cheated. Why are people cheating? And for me, one of the really interesting things about the series, one of the things that drew me to it, was the opportunity to ask that question. Well, why do people cheat? What is drawing people to a site like Ashley Madison? 37 million users. Why are those people all on the site? Yes, they got some crazy marketing. Yes, they're kind of like very smart about their branding, all the rest of it. But the fact that there are 37 million people on the site would suggest that it's answering a kind of widely felt and deeply felt need. And it was really fascinating speaking to people who were on the site, people who are in the series, but also a lot of people we spoke to who didn't want to take part in the series, but did have conversations with us. And almost kind of universally, what you realize is that people who are on there, really seriously on there to cheat on their partners, they were in marriages that weren't happy. They weren't happy people. They weren't in a good point in their lives, and they weren't in a good point in their marriage. And so I think one of the things that really struck me was how much kind of pain and unhappiness is often driving infidelity. People are just looking for something that they're lacking, and that lack they're feeling is that they're finding it hard to cope with.
And as you've already pointed out, there's obviously this demand doesn't go away, right? Because if any business should have gone under, it's this one, right? Because what we haven't discussed is the fact, is not in detail at least, is that all the details, all the names of the users eventually get released, right? And so you can call it a witch hunt or not or whatever. It's just, the reality is anyone who had an account pretty much got outed in terms of being on this site. And so, yeah, somehow, they're still, in fact, what are their numbers now? They're at close to 70 million now, I think.
70 million members now. Yeah, the site has. That's right.
Gosh, so, obviously there is this, but then what is the reality of this site? Because, I mean, how many real hookups were there? I mean, it strikes me because also what's interesting is that this company, as you say, was well ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Right. And so all the stuff that then comes out in the revelations about how many women are actually on the site, right? And all that you do touch on this is how many of them all have the same IP address in Canada, right? And then people who work there acknowledging that, we knew there were fake accounts. And then what struck me is in this world of where we're talking about AI, they had all these AI bots operating back then, nearly 10 years ago.
It's another sense in which the site was actually really kind of ahead of its time in quite a kind of a dark and arguably underhand way. But they had these primitive AI chatbots that were sending out messages to thousands of men from fake profiles that staff at Ashley Madison had created. And of course, the crucial thing to understand is that the way the payment system works on Ashley Madison is you don't pay to be a member of the site. You pay to send messages and to reply to messages when they're sent to you. So thousands of male users were paying Ashley Madison money to respond to messages they thought were from real women, but they weren't really at all. They were sent by chatbots from fake profiles that had been created by Ashley Madison staff.
It's an amazing business model.
It's an amazing business model, as long as it lasts, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. As long as it's
discovered.
So but is the business model still based on credits, isn't it?
It's still, I believe it's still based on credits, but I think we have to, our lawyers are always very keen for us to draw a very clear distinction between the Ashley Madison, which the series is about, the kind of pre-hack Ashley Madison, and the current iteration of the company, which has changed a lot. And the company have come out several times and said, there's no fake profiles on there anymore, and we look after your data much more carefully. But certainly, in that, it is still based, I believe, on a kind of like pay as you message credit system. Yeah.
I mean, you raise an interesting point, and certainly we don't usually talk about it on this podcast, but when lawyers do get involved in documentaries, and I mean, obviously the story and what was probably the most interesting and explores a lot of these topics is about the old Ashley Madison. But is that, I mean, how much of it not dwelling on what's happened since is more because the lawyers are also, it's really not, it isn't part of the story as much.
Yeah, I mean, the story kind of the story of the hack has its own kind of narrative arc,
Right.
And from a kind of Ashley Madison point of view, the arc is kind of like topped and tailed by, Noel Biederman arrives in the company, has his vision for how to grow it, sets about doing it very successfully, and then the hack ultimately, and all the stuff that comes out, the revelations that come out, ultimately lead to Noel's downfall. And the company is fined and, is I think fairly close at certain points to going under, and has to really seriously kind of rebuild itself. And that's quite a nice kind of like arc in terms of the arc of a 3-part documentary series. And then of course, running alongside that, you've got the stories of the users who were on the site, why they were there, and then the revelation, then them having to confess to their partners when the hack happens. And then the fallout from those marriages and in those lives off the back of those revelations. And that kind of art, again, the fallout from those revelations and people's names being exposed kind of happened in the immediate aftermath of the hack, really. And those stories then, from our point of view, kind of come to an end. And there's quite a nicely shaped narrative arc there.
And I guess we should just say, too, just for those who haven't seen it yet, it is quite devastating what happened to some people. And, suicides were committed and things like that, which you document in the series.
That's right, and that's it. I mean, it's a good point, and certainly, there were some really, some really awful things happened as a result of this, and that speaks, I think, to the question of, who did the hack. And one of the things that's really interesting is that the hack is done supposedly on these kind of moral grounds that, we just can't bear how awful Ashley Madison is. They're ruining lives, they're destroying marriages. We've got to stop them, and we're going to stop them by publishing all the names of all their users. But actually, you could argue a lot more harm was done by that act of publishing the names of all the users, exposing all those people against their will.
Right.
Tremendous harm was caused by that. And so I think it's difficult really to kind of to hold the moral high ground as the people who undertook that hack, and to argue that somehow you've done that hack as a part of some moral crusade and it was in the public interest or an act of kind of virtue for you to expose all those names.
Well, maybe even more reason why whoever's done it is still keeping secret, may take it to their deathbed at this stage. Yeah. I mean, how did you become involved with this project?
I was called by got a call from Minnow Films, who had the commission from Netflix. I think they've been developing for about a year, and rang me and said, "Oh, we're making this series, and would you like to come and direct it?" And they kind of like laid out the rough sketch of the story to me, and I thought that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, and were you kind of? Yeah, did you remember the whole scandal and all that stuff with the hack and everything, or yeah?
I could, yes. I never followed it that closely. Like, I did know of Ashley Madison, but I didn't follow the story that closely when it happened. I think it was a much bigger story in the US than it was over here, actually. Like, it was a story in the UK, definitely. But I think it was a bigger story in the US, and certainly at the time I didn't follow it super closely. So a lot of the revelations were new to me.
Yeah.
But also, whenever you make a film or a series, no matter how closely you followed it in the news, when you actually start talking to the real people who have lived through it and been involved, the whole thing takes on a kind of depth and a richness, that goes far beyond what you ever would have gathered from the news.
I mean, so you come in, what surprised you most in terms of doing all these interviews and the research and everything?
It's a good question. I guess one of the things that did strike me the most, as I said, is earlier, kind of alluded to earlier, is this kind of coming to understand the reasons why people cheat, and this kind of really hearing time and again from people about how unhappy they were in their marriages, and this image that I kind of came to understand of people who were looking to cheat, but because they really were really unhappy, and were just trying to kind of like fill a hole, fill a sense of kind of like lack in their lives. But one of the things that you learn then following their stories, of course, is that it's not just because it's understandable doesn't mean that that's a very smart way to go about trying to solve those problems.
Right.
Because I also think another really big lesson from the series for me is just quite how important honesty is.
Right.
Talking. If there's one kind of like big takeaway for me, it's that keeping secrets and telling lies is not really going to get you anywhere that you want to be.
Yeah. I mean, not to focus on them, because you talk with a lot of different people, but it does kind of brings me to this this couple who are kind of one of the linchpins of the series, Nia and Sam Rader. I mean, that's an interesting. Maybe I'm of a certain age, but this whole idea of vlogging your personal life to everyone, and they're opening their lives to everyone at the same time he is living this lie. I mean, so there's this. Were you surprised? I guess it shouldn't surprise us that people like that, who do open themselves up on a daily basis, and there still are, I gather, would be willing to share this with us. But it is quite remarkable, that this is all playing out in front of all of us. This is another sort of what you're shining a light on. If you're shining a light on .com and hacking and cybersecurity, this whole element of society that we now have.
I think that's right, isn't it? Yeah, and in 2015, it was, I think, they're kind of like the early days of the world of kind of YouTube vloggers
and reaction type stuff. And,
yeah, exactly. And I think there was maybe in a sense of more kind of innocent time, insofar as we all maybe at that time were more inclined to believe that these were real people, really were honestly in an unfiltered way showing us their real lives.
Right.
And then, of course, what happened with Sam and Nia and the revelations and the secrets that you realized he was keeping, and that was kind of maybe one of the first times that that veneer began to crack. And we realized, actually, yes, it's filmed on shonky kind of handheld camera, and yes, it feels very real and authentic, but actually, this is a kind of just as carefully curated and potentially just as much of a kind of fantasy life we're seeing here as anything that's kind of like on more traditional TV.
Yeah. So, and then what about this? What sort of surprised me is, but I don't know what you think, this whole Canadian angle. right? I wouldn't expect this Ashley Madison to be a Canadian company and to be all based in Toronto. That's maybe my biases, but I did that surprise you?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's not something that I've ever thought about before, but I guess you're right. It doesn't necessarily, this kind of like super audacious, kind of outlandish, kind of racy internet company, infidelity dating site doesn't necessarily fit with the kind of stereotypical image you have of Canada. Maybe that's true.
You expect it to be in the valley somewhere in California or something like that, and then these guys are in some, I mean, that building you kept showing, I swear I've even on a business trip been in one of the buildings they were in right there in Toronto in the business district,
That's
it's
right,
just kind it is just, yeah, these guys who all just, and they're all friends and they all went to summer camps together and then, just got together and just so happened to launch and build and grow an infidelity website.
That's right, yeah. And in a way, that's kind of one of the great things about the story and about the kind of like, the rise of Ashley Madison's story is that, as you say, it does feel like it was just his group of mates.
Yeah.
They all kind of grew up together in Toronto and got together and, as you say, launched this company together.
Yeah. And we're talking about what the main thing it's taught you is about what kind of psychology and what people are going through, especially mostly these men when they're going onto this site. I mean, I guess there's other human emotions that are coming out through all this saga too. I mean, there's as we see in Nia and Sam's case, the power for forgiveness that happens at the same time. We also this desire to shame that we have in our society.
Yeah, that's right, and to say, I think that's probably the second kind of like, in a way, big takeaway for me. Aside from the idea about the importance of being honest and not keeping secrets and lies, it's that I think the series shows what happens when that kind of public judgmental moralizing, that kind of desire to shame and expose people. When that really kind of takes off and people get carried away and start to really kind of indulge in that kind of attitude too much, some really awful things can happen, and some really awful things did happen in this case. I mean, Christie's wife John ended up killing himself.
Yeah,
because his name was exposed online, and because somebody thought that they kind of had the right, or it would be a good thing, or it was an important thing, or that that they should tell his boss.
Yeah.
That his name had been exposed online, and I think that for him triggered feelings of shame that that he was ultimately wasn't able to cope with.
And she, I think, I won't try to put words in her mouth because she does it so eloquently in the series as well, in terms of her kind of the way her conclusions about all that. I think is definitely well worth a watch. I mean,
she puts it very beautifully, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does.
She's an incredible woman, Christie. Really, to have the kind of courage to come out and to take part in the series, and to for what she wants to say, not to be about her husband's infidelity, and for her not to want to talk about how awful it was that her husband cheated on her, but for her to really want in fact to defend her husband despite all his faults, and to really want to kind of like show point out to us how toxic and how kind of like destructive that kind of judgmental moralizing can be. I think that's very kind of like brave and courageous and powerful the way she does that.
Indeed. I think we'll leave it there in terms of the film specifically, and just to say we're actually it's moved quickly, but I think we're coming close to the end of our time together, Toby. But what's next for you? I mean, I know you're probably basking in the glow of this project finally dropping and being released, but do you have any projects you can tell us about?
I've enjoyed having a bit of time off, and at the moment there's a couple of possible things. One particularly exciting, another Netflix project that we're waiting to find out if we're going to get the green light for, but can't say anything about it at the moment, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you guys never can. But but you've got an interesting background. You've got you've this, but you've a lot of stuff on UK politics and things. I mean, it's quite a. Is there a theme that runs through all your projects?
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I think as a filmmaker, I'm always interested really in trying to understand people, understand what people have done, why they did it, and what it meant to them, and therefore I think once you understand those things, then you can begin to kind of get a sense of what it should maybe mean to us.
Right.
So I guess that kind of, trying to answer those questions is maybe what kind of like drives most of my work. But the Ashley Madison series was a kind of tonally a bit of a shift for me in a way, which was quite nice, because I've done quite a lot of stuff that was quite dark and quite heavy sometimes. Films about murder, about sexual abuse, that kind of thing. Like really quite kind of dark, heavy subjects. And the Ashley Madison series actually was an opportunity to experiment with a slightly different kind of tone, something that in places a bit more kind of cheeky and playful, which as a filmmaker was really enjoyable.
Okay, well, I wish you all the success. I hope it all continues. Thanks again for making this film. And just to say, just to remind our listeners and viewers that we've been talking with Toby Paton, the award-winning director of Ashley Madison's Sex, Lies, and Scandal. Check it out. It dropped on May 15th on Netflix. Thanks for coming on, Toby. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thanks again for joining us on Factual America. A big shout out to everyone at Intersound Audio in York, England for their great studio and fine editing and production skills. A big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to you, our listeners. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. And please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, which specializes in documentaries, television, and shorts about the U.S. for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is factualamerica.com.